So, as you know, this is part of the webinar series organized by the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean and hosted by the Wolf Institute, organized also in collaboration with our sponsor partners, which are the Henry Pirenne Institute at the University of Ghent, the Medieval Studies Research Group at the University of Lincoln, and then the universities of Exeter, Edinburgh, Liège, and the Institut Milà i Fontanals, the CSIC of Barcelona. And I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. So just briefly, also saying something about the Wolf and the Society. So the Wolf Institute, as you know, combines teaching, scholarship, and public engagement, and it focuses on Jews, Christians, and Muslims to encourage tolerance and foster understanding between people of all beliefs. And the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean is a society dedicated to the study, to the academic study of several aspects of Mediterranean history and culture, especially between the period that goes from the 5th to the 15th century. And the society, as you might know, is also linked to the journal Almanac, and as Miriam would do, who normally introduced the session, this is our journal. So please consider subscribing and become a member of the society to gain benefits of several sorts. Join us also for our biennial conferences and obviously getting regular issues of our journal. So how the webinar works, as you know, we have an hour overall, well, now a little bit less, thanks to technical issues. This session is going to be broadcast live on Facebook. And then the recording of this, the video recording is going to also be uploaded on the YouTube channel of the Wolf Institute. There will be time, so our speakers will present their fascinating research, and there will be then time for a Q&A session afterwards. Speaking of which, I would encourage participants to please put their questions in the Q&A chat. You will see the icon at the bottom of your screen rather than in the actual chat, because that makes it easier for our chair to actually spot what are the questions. So please do use the Q&A button for that. So thanks again. I'll now would like to introduce our chair, Nikki Tsoukarakis, who's going to introduce our speaker. So thanks, Nikki, in advance. And thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Thank you, Antonella, and thank you very much to our speakers for joining us, and welcome everybody to this evening's seminar. I think this is going to be a very interesting and stimulating session. The session is entitled Monks and Friars and Their Networks in a Fluid Space. And for those who haven't picked up on this already, the title refers to Greek monks and to Latin friars in the Eastern Mediterranean in the late medieval and early modern period. Accordingly, we have two speakers this evening whose research focuses on either side of the Orthodox Catholic religious divide. And I think that's quite important. Obviously, religious and ecclesiastical history has always been one of the major constituent parts of research into the Eastern Mediterranean, the Latin states of Greece and so on after the Fourth Crusade. And I think it's probably fair to say that that field is undergoing a little bit of a renaissance at the moment, not least because younger generations of scholars are perhaps less encumbered by confessional sensibilities or allegiances, certainly compared to the researchers of the 19th century, but even of much of the 20th century. But even thus, the research fields of Latin and Greek monasticism remain relatively separate, and I believe it's quite rare to see them discussed side by side. So I'm very happy, therefore, to have two papers this evening showcasing recent research into each of the two monastic traditions. And hopefully this will allow us to have to draw some interesting parallels between the research trends and concerns of each field. So as Antonella said, we'll take the two papers in sequence and we'll have questions later at the end. So we'll start with Ludivine Voisin. Ludivine is a scientific member of the French school at Athens, where she is researching a project on Greek monasticism in the Venetian territories of the Eastern Mediterranean in the 16th century, about which I believe she will be talking to us today. This move into the 16th century is recent for Ludivine and is an extension of her previous work, which focused on the late Middle Ages. She has written an excellent and very, very thick book on Greek monasticism under the Latins in the late Middle Ages, entitled Les monastères grecs sous la domination latine, comme un loup poursuivant un mouton, which was published by Brepols in 2021. And as far as I'm aware, that is the only book that attempts an overall examination of Greek monasticism in the Greek lands under Latin rule. So it's a very important study. The move into the 16th century, I think, is particularly exciting. One of the factors that make the medieval Mediterranean so interesting, but also so hard to study, is its fragmentation, the sheer number of polities that are involved. And of course, the Ottoman conquest, once that happens, further complicates this situation, whilst also creating a convenient chronological boundary for historians. So many of us tend to work on either side of that boundary, either before or after the Ottoman conquest. So I'm very eager to hear today from a historian whose work and expertise straddles this chronological divide. Her talk today is entitled Between Latins and Ottomans, the Orthodox Monks in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans in the 15th and 16th centuries. Our second speaker this evening is Donal Cooper. Donal is Professor of Italian Renaissance art at the University of Cambridge, and he is particularly interested in the art of the Franciscans, not just in Italy, but across the Venetian Stato Da Mar, and especially, I think, Crete and Dalmatia, from the 13th century to the 16th century. So both chronologically and geographically, there is a significant overlap between the work of our two speakers, though one of them looks at Orthodox monasticism, and as I said, and the other one at Latin monasticism. His 2013 book, co-authored with Janet Robson and entitled The Making of Assisi, the Pope, the Franciscans, and the Painting of the Basilica, won the 2014 Art Booker Prize. But since then, he has contributed to an absurdly high number of collected volumes and exhibition catalogues, and he has co-edited several collections himself. Most recently, Late Medieval Italian Art and Its Contexts, which was published by Boydell in 2022. A lot of his work also concerns the use of digital media to display medieval works of art in their original contexts. So I should plug something that we're working on with Donal together. We are currently putting the finishing touches on a special issue about the Franciscan Friary of St. Francis in Candia in Crete, which we expect to be published by the Brill journal Frangogratia at the end of the year, I think. Donal's talk today is entitled The Thin Grey Line, Reviewing Recent Research on Franciscan Art and Architecture in the Eastern Mediterranean. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Ludivine.
Okay, thank you. So good evening, everyone, because it's late in Greece now. I would like to express my gratitude to Nikos Garakis for inviting me to speak about a current project about the Orthodox nuns and monks in the Eastern Mediterranean in the 16th century. As Nikki said, this project was born out of my interest in Orthodox monasticism in the Greek territories conquered by the Latins during the Third and the Fourth Crusades. Following the recent studies on Latin and Greek monasticism in the territories of contact between Greeks, Latins, and Muslims in the whole Mediterranean, that you can see on the right part of the slide, I set out to write a synthesis on the Orthodox monasticism under Latin rule, which was published in 2021. The synthesis aimed at answering a seemingly simple question: did Greek monasteries survive the new political, ecclesiastical, economic, social, and cultural frameworks imposed by new Latin elites? Through published and unpublished sources spanning the years 1191 to 1570-71, this study has provided an understanding of the circumstances under which Greek monasticism survived under Latin rule. It has shown that although moments of tension did appear in the sources, they remained occasional, and at least part of the Greek monks acknowledged the authority of the Latins as legitimate in order to guarantee their economic prosperity and maintain their customs, faith, and forms of monastic life. Undoubtedly, many questions remained unanswered in this study, and a fresh approach was needed. So this is my current project at the École Française d'Athènes, which could be translated as under the Synonymous rule, the Orthodox monastic word in Venetian ruled Greek territories in the 6th century, territories, individuals, and networks. The goal is to gain a deeper understanding of the Orthodox monasticism through a complementary approach, that is to say, from below, through the individuals and groups that made up the monastic world, and I mean the nuns, the monks, and all those connected with these communities. The study area, as you can see, covers 3 islands under Venetian rule: Cyprus, Crete, and Corfu. These territories did not join the Venetian dominium at the same time, and this allows to compare the evolution of the monastic world in rather different contexts. The project consists of 2 parts. On the one hand, I would like to investigate the nature and organization of monastic communities, as well as their links and functions with and within local societies. On the other hand, I would like to analyze the geographic pattern of monasticism and the mobility of monks at various levels. The unearthing of hitherto unseen material has actually expanded the scope of my inquiry. And I would like to share with you tonight 2 interesting records I found in the archives. First, in 1537, when Cyprus was under Venetian rule for about 50 years, Orthodox monks from the southwest part of the island defied the Greek bishops by being ordained by the Orthodox patriarchs of Jerusalem and Alexandria. The monks came from St. Nicholas of the Cats, that you can see below, near Limassol, but monks from another monastery, the Engristra, in the west, seemed to play a role as well. The patriarchs, who were under Ottoman rule, were declared schismatic and rejected by the Roman Church by Venice. And therefore, monks' ordinations by such authorities led to disorder and the spread of heresy, according to the Venetian authorities. Actually, by bypassing the Greek episcopal hierarchy, the monks challenged the political and ecclesiastical order that the Franks had established at the beginning of the 13th century. Unlike in other Greek territories under Latin rule, Greek bishops subordinate to Latin hierarchy had actually been maintained and retained the right to ordain priests. The path to being ordained in the Holy Land is not only defined by the profound significance of the Holy Land or the island's proximity to the mainland. The clergy, both secular and regular from the Holy Land, have had solidified their connections, particularly on an economic and spiritual level, with the Western Cyprus monasteries, which they claimed as their dependencies. In the following decades, the 1540s, monks from another monastery, St. Savas Tiscaronis or Tiscaronos, monks from St. Savas Monastery in Palestine, then under Ottoman rule, disputed Venice's right over another monastery of southwestern Cyprus, St. Savas Tiscaronis. The monks, the Palestinian monks' claims once again caused problems for the local government, which tried to prove that the monastery had already belonged to the public authorities. In French, we say puissance publique. I don't know if my translation is right. So they proved that this monastery had belonged to Venice before the annexation of the island to no avail. To prove its legal rights, Venice, despite technically owning the whole island, felt compelled to seek justification. This prudent approach may have stemmed from the geopolitical context. Following the conquest of Rhodes, the siege of Corfu, and the losses incurred at Nafplio and Monevasia, Venice's military strength had waned significantly. Therefore, Venice tried to avoid a conflict over authority with the Palestinian monks, which could have threatened the fragile peace agreement signed in 1540. The Palestinian monks indeed took their case to various diplomatic and legal bodies on both sides of the Venetian-Ottoman border, exerting pressure on Venice. It is not known whether the Palestinian monks' protest finally led to a recognition of their rights. However, we can assume that the unrest in southwestern Cyprus during the 1530s, 1550s was partially fueled by outsiders who exploited Venice's vulnerability to assert their claims and seize property beyond the borders of the Ottoman Empire. Essentially, the island's proximity to the Ottoman Empire impacted Venice's internal policies. Venice had to be cautious and engage in legal disputes. The Orthodox monasteries not only represented economic, but also power issues for Venice in this remote part of the island, away from the center, Nicosia. Additionally, they were significant for the Orthodox Church under Ottoman rule, as the patriarchal sees were reunited with the Ottoman conquest of the Near East. These two tumultuous incidents prompt the researcher to broaden the perspective, crossing the boundary between the Venetian and Ottoman territories, and to re-examine the local narrative of Cypriot Orthodox monasteries during the 16th century into the broader history of the Orthodox Church. I would like to pursue this line of research by writing in the future a compared history of the 15th and 16th century Orthodox monasticism, including the Venetian possessions, the late Byzantine Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. I hope that this future project will help us to deepen our understanding of the factors that shape the evolution of monastic communities in the face of shifting political, economic, religious, and social circumstances in the Eastern Mediterranean at the end of the Middle Ages and the early modern period. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your comments, questions, objections about my current and even future project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonella. I know I certainly have some questions already. Sorry, I said Antonella, I meant Ludivine. Okay, I'll give the floor now to Donal.
Thank you very much, Nikki, and to Antonella and colleagues at the Society for the Medieval Mediterranean and Wolf for this invitation. I'm going to talk about some research in progress and some more speculative thoughts that have come out from my work over recent years. As Nikki said, a lot of this has been in collaboration, and we have publications forthcoming in the Brepols journal, Francocrazia, shortly, both single-authored and co-authored, and I'll pick up those in due course. The mendicant orders in the what we broadly call the Francocrazia, or more narrowly the Venetian Stato Da Mar, have been seen really as the key agents in terms of the circulation of artistic ideas and the permeability, in particular, between Latin and Orthodox traditions, both in terms of genres of artwork and in terms of styles, giving rise to objects like these, which are often characterized as in some form hybrid Latin Orthodox artworks. Icons incorporating Latin saints, in some cases for Latin patrons, but not always. And this has been, as Nikki has signaled, a rich area of study. His own book is one of the key points of reference from 2012. I'd also flag Olga Graziu's 2010 study of Cretan architecture, and a really fantastic conference in 2017 organized by Joanna Christoforaki, called The Mendicant Orders in the Eastern Mediterranean, which unfortunately has never made its way to publication, but many of the contributions to it have kind of crept out over the following years into various journals and other contexts. And a lot of focus has been on images like this. Crete, in particular, is the only instance where we have Latin saints appearing in Orthodox contexts. These figures of St. Peter Martyr, St. Francis, both in rural Orthodox churches in the Cretan countryside. And again, there's been good work done on these recently. Vicky Foscalu's work, particularly important. For the purposes of this very short intervention, I'm using Nikki's wonderful map of the Franciscan houses in Greece to pinpoint the two case studies I'll look at. One of them is the major urban foundation, the Church of St. Francis in Candia, modern-day Heraklion. The other one is much less known. I think Nikki's probably one of the very few people who's looked at it. The Church of St. Mary of the Angels in the Cretan countryside. Now, Candia, Heraklion, has been the focus of much of the scholarship in this area, thanks in large part to the documentation that survives in Venice, exceptionally for this one centre. Maria Georgopoulou's famous book from 2001 really mapped out the thematic and theoretical ground, particularly around ideas of hybridity and cultural exchange, using the example of Heraklion. And Heraklion, of course, had many major churches. Some of them almost reached the present day. The great Augustinian Latin Church of San Salvatore, demolished in the 1970s. But the major church was the Church of St. Francis. It's the one that's picked out in most of the pilgrim accounts. You see here the Bredenbach view. It's very much on the Acropolis of the city, the most prominent location. It seems to have been the biggest church as well and the most architecturally sophisticated. It crops up in most of the visual representational evidence we have. Brendel Monti here, and then much later in the great series of military plans that get made in the 16th and 17th centuries, and in this wonderful, still unpublished map by Menaeus Clonsas in the final years of Venetian rule. We can glean quite a lot about the architecture from that. We've got this fantastic drawing reproduced by Giuseppe Girola, which records the church after it collapsed largely in an earthquake in the middle of the 19th century. But this is probably our most valuable record of its architecture, and it preserves many features like plug holes for scaffolding, which can be picked out in surviving monuments in Italy, especially. This is essentially a monument from the second half of the 14th century. Sometimes in the literature, you'll see it being dated earlier, but we're pretty certain it's from the 1350s, 60s onwards. It comes down in stages under Ottoman rule. When Girola is in Crete, there's one little bit of it standing, the sacristy, which continued as a mosque, but then that is also demolished to make way for the Heraclean Archaeological Museum, which is now what sits on top of the site. And we have, from 2010, important excavations undertaken by the local ephorate. You see here what is visible behind the museum, largely the transept and the apse of the building, and those archaeological reports we're still waiting for them to be published, and they're going to be very important when they do come into circulation. Now, alongside the physical material evidence, we're very fortunate in terms of the documents we can put alongside the Candia Church, particularly those in Venice, and this is a volume of inventories, the best survival of its kind from Venetian Crete, now in the Marciana. And in the Franco-Grazia volume forthcoming, Nikki and I are publishing a full edition of this with commentary and scholarly apparatus as well. And this was composed in 1417, gives a great deal of information around bequests, the economic state of the convent, also its sacristy goods and altar furnishings. Here we've got a bequest for a chapel dedicated to John the Baptist, and it's rather nice because the Marciana Codex also includes cross-references to the notarial archives. And in fact, of course, the Notae de Candia do survive, or a large part of them survives in the Archivio di Stato in Venice. So we can actually use these documents as they were intended to go forward and make further archival links. So very happily, the document referred to is exactly where it should be in the Notae, and we can look at that and gain additional evidence. It would have been very hard to follow otherwise. Here, for instance, we have a full list of 16 friars at the Candia convent, and I think it's worth noting the great geographical diversity that we see, not only Italians, some local from all different parts of Italy, also further afield, Germany and Spain. So I think we need to kind of bear this in mind as well when we think about a Venetian context, a Latin context, when thinking about cultural exchange within Crete. And one can dig deeper and indeed find out that there were paintings that were going to be painted in this chapel. One other instance of paintings being asked for a chapel in the church, this published by Sally McKee, talks about paintings, but it says in a modo et forma clause, they've got to be as good as the frescoes or the images in the Dominican church nearby, St. Peter's, St. Peter Martyr in Candia. And here we are. Here we still have some frescoes surviving, and these are very much, we think, by Orthodox, by Greek painters, even though they have Latin inscriptions and in some senses have Latin iconographic inflections as well. In the 17th century, we've got another fantastic source, a pastoral apostolic, in fact, visitation by Archbishop Blue Costello. And again, we're preparing a full edition of this for future publication. This is a gold mine of information, even though it's quite late. It allows us to identify this painting in Venice as the high altarpiece for the Franciscan church. And this was made in Venice, shipped to Crete, and then shipped back after the siege. So it's well traveled. This is an instance, if you like, of a metropolitan product being sent to Crete as opposed to one being produced locally. There's lots of altars, 18 altars in the church alone, others in the convent. And we also learn that the church was still divided by a rood screen, tramezzata, which was quite archaic at this point, but is very interesting because that seems to be shown up in some of the very, very schematic ground plans that we have from this period. And also it seems to be the case as well for the Church of St. Peter Martyr, that this feature actually survived through till the end of the Venetian period, which is quite interesting. And in particular, and here I'm citing the work of Athanasios Milas of the University of Crete. It's really fascinating because we seem to get reflections of these structures in local Byzantine churches. Rather remarkable. These iconostasis screens, which look very unusual in the Byzantine tradition, but very likely reflect these lost metropolitan Latin monuments. So again, thinking about how ideas, we're not only talking about images, we're talking about liturgical furniture as well. Turning now to the other example, Moroni, and I realize I need to wrap up, don't I, Nikki? This is a complete contrast, middle of nowhere church, far to the south of Heraklion. No urban centre around it. It's been restored in the 90s, but was studied by Girola when it was still a ruin. Very, very interesting. It's got side chapels. We don't know exactly what they're for, whether they're chantry chapels. That suggests a degree of lay patronage for this convent. And we know even in the 16th century, again, thanks to Nikki's work, that there was a community of 12 friars here. It's very close. In fact, here just a few other details, to the Franciscan observant church of St. Salvatore in Hania, which is built in the 1420s. And I think what we're probably seeing here is the fruits of an observant moment in the 1420s, 1430s, which leads to a kind of a new burst of settlement on Crete, but in a different way from the big urban foundations from the earlier period. And again, this is a reminder, and we can see parallels of this in Italy, in Dalmatia with observant settlement as well, that often we're not comparing like for like, even when we're talking about things within what we would regard as a Latin tradition. In fact, the priorities of the Franciscan observance in the 1420s, 1430s, probably really very different from the Candia Franciscans in the second half of the 14th century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Donal. It's very fascinating, this story about the monks in the 1530s seeking ordination in Alexandria and Jerusalem. And if I understand correctly what you are saying, you see this as a kind of act of resistance against the Venetian authorities. I guess I've got two questions about that. One is, why don't they get ordination? Could they possibly get ordination at the monastery of Mount Sinai in Egypt, which would kind of circumvent the problem because they have a bishop there, a Greek bishop there, who is undeniably an Orthodox bishop, but he has good relations with Venice as well. Is it intentionally, in order to annoy the Venetians, that they go to the Patriarch of Jerusalem or of Alexandria? And secondly, second question, what do the Cretan monks do in that period? Where do they get ordained?
Thank you, Nikki, for all these questions. Actually, in the sources, then it is not said that they resist the Venetian authorities, actually. The Greek bishop of Limassol, actually Lefkara, denounced them because they don't want to be ordained by him. So I think that they resist the Greek bishop authority first. Then about the Sinai, yeah, I did not think about it, but it's very interesting. They say that it's more prestigious to be ordained by the Patriarch of Jerusalem. So I don't know if they could have the possibility to be ordained in the Sinai, but we saw. I mean, travels between Cyprus and Jerusalem, because actually they take the opportunity of pilgrimages to be ordained in Jerusalem. And for your question about Crete, as far as I know, monks from Crete are ordained in the Peloponnese. So yeah, they also have to go out of the island to be ordained.
Yeah, I know that was the case certainly until the 15th century. I was wondering whether after the 15th century, once relations are even more normalized between the Latins and the Greeks, they ever allow them to get ordained on the island. But as far as I know, that doesn't happen. They always have to go to the Peloponnese, right?
I think, but I haven't found any source about that. But yeah, I think that they continue to go in the Peloponnese to be ordained.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Donal as well about St. Mary of the Angels, the rural church in the south of Crete. You're right, it looks very, very much like the observant church in Chania. How common is it to have Franciscan observant churches in the middle of nowhere? Because usually I know that there was a tradition of heremitism within the Franciscan order, but usually we associate the Franciscan observants with urban ministry. Is it something that we see a lot of elsewhere?
I think if you look at the Italian and Dalmatian context, there's I mean the pattern of observant settlement is quite phenomenal in terms of the number of houses, and they tend to be mixed. They tend to be either close to urban centers in the first kind of iteration. So San Salvatore, St. Saviour's in Chania is kind of typical on the kind of urban periphery, but also convents which are really quite remote and in as it were kind of difficult to reach to places or for example. So we've got quite a lot on that. And what's interesting is I think sometimes thinking about what these convents are supposed to be for, I thought it was interesting in the bulls which the bull which goes to the observants in Anya, Rifimnon, and Heraklion at the outset. It also talks about how they are going to receive friars from what's called the Bosnian Vicariate. So there's actually a kind of circulation of friars, sometimes in an extraterritorial, extra-provincial way, which actually means having kind of convents which are in stable locations, but not necessarily ministering to an urban or a lay Latin public. It seems to be important. So it may be a little bit unexpected, but there's lots. I think there's probably quite a lot of particularly in Dalmatia. Although here in Crete we maybe have this case, and maybe there's the case near Kissamos that Girola looked at and which Olga Grazius looked at. So those might be the only two ones we know of.
Okay, very nice. Okay, we've got a question from Tassos Papakostas. So Tassos is wondering whether Venice's response to the actions of the monks is more about financial considerations. It's more about who owns the monasteries and who controls the income of the monasteries.
I think that Venice is rather anxious because first, Orthodox from the Ottoman Empire, patriarchs, monks, want to have rights over these monasteries. And of course, with Venice, it's an issue because I think that it's a way to control this remote region. And also, of course, Venice wants to be sure that the monasteries, for example, would give money to Venice, would give taxes, will pay the taxes to Venice. I think it's an issue of control, of rights, and of course of money. We know that the Venetians, well, we know that all these things are always mixed, I would say, for Venice, yeah.
Thank you. Do you think there's also an issue of influences coming from what is potentially an enemy territory?
I think it's also a question of political influence, maybe more than religious, but yeah, political influence of people coming from abroad, from the Ottoman Empire. Yes, I think that Venice is not it's very anxious. I cannot find the word, but by also political and military issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is probably likely. Do you think there's a difference after the kind of well, let me rephrase. Do we see anything similar from the earlier period when the Mamluks are still in control in Egypt, and obviously there will be coming and going from of Greek monks between Egypt and Cyprus and Egypt and Crete. Do we see any similar concerns in that period?
I did not find such concerns in the sources for the previous period. Of course, there is still monks traveling between all these territories. But I think that the context of the 1530s, 1540s, 1550s is very particular because the Ottomans have conquered the Near East for a few decades, and Venice, yes, the military strength of Venice has waned. So I think that it's particular concern in that period, and I could not see such problems before.
Okay, Donal.
Thanks, Ludivine. I've got many questions, but I was curious in particular do you come across tensions between the Greek monasteries that you're looking at and Latin monasteries? I'm thinking of on Cyprus of Benedictine, or are they really what is the evidence for kind of a Latin presence in outside the urban centers?
As of now, as far as Cyprus is concerned, because I've almost worked on Cyprus, I could not find any tension between Latin and Greek communities, monastic communities. Maybe this explanation is not enough, but I think that the most of the Latin communities were in the cities. On the contrary, the Greek monks were above all in the country. So maybe they were not much in contact, actually. But I think that this is not enough to explain it, and I would like to explain it. But in general, not only for the 16th century, if we look at all the centuries of the Francocratia, we cannot find much contact between monks, except, of course, a few episodes of tensions, as I said. But above all, in the 13th century, I mean, just after the conquest. So maybe the lack of contact could explain the fact that there was not much tension. But I think that I have to look at the sources if I can find something else. But yeah, we must find other explanations, I think.
There's a question for Donal in the chat by Jeffrey Meyer Fernandez. He says, thank you very much to both speakers. I have a question for Professor Cooper. Why do Latin saints appear in the sanctoral of several Greek Cretan churches? Can we assume that the local Greeks adopted their cult, or were they representations commissioned by Latins who frequented these Greek shrines?
Very good question, and there are people who have thought about this a great deal. I mean, I think Vicky Foskelou's, your colleague, Nikki's written quite extensively on this recently. I think it's quite difficult. I mean, in terms of who uses these small rural churches, I mean, the Olga Grațiu hypothesis that the widespread presence of kind of double nave churches in Crete is to some degree a kind of co-confessional arrangement. It's very hard to prove, but that looks that there are a lot of examples, and it's a peculiarity to the island. I think it's interesting. A lot of these frescoes, the examples that we have, they tend to be grouped in the Pediada region, which is in a sense the most Venetian. It had the kind of highest density of Venetian estates. It's closest to Heraklion, so those are some of the most prominent examples. Is there, in fact, a kind of openness from the point of view of an Orthodox public to incorporating the saints? Are these saints in some respects there as an acknowledgement of the major houses, the major monasteries in Heraklion? Say, I think it's interesting. We've got St. Peter Martyr rather than St. Dominic at Apostoloi, because the Dominican church in Candia is dedicated to Peter Martyr, not Dominic. So there's a kind of, whether that means a kind of assimilation of select Latin saints into an Orthodox pantheon. They're never that close to the altar, it should be said, in these images, in these schemes. Not a very clear answer, Jeffrey, sorry, but very interesting.
Yes, and there is, of course, if I can add to that, there is, of course, the suggestion that the cult of St. Francis in particular met with some relative success amongst the Greeks too, though much of the evidence for that comes from the Franciscans themselves. So one could be forgiven for being a little bit dubious of it. Okay, I think we might have time. If there is another question, we might have time for one. If not, obviously we can we will have to stop the recording of the session, but even if there are more than one questions, we can hang on and continue discussing them even less formally than we have up until now. I'll do a very quick one for Donal. Obviously, you showed us that beautiful altarpiece now in San Giovanni a Paolo in Venice. Do you think there's any chance of discovering other survivals from Crete somewhere in Italy?
There may be. I mean, we know that more came back to Venice than we can currently account for. So these were paintings that were extant in the late 1700s. Then they go missing in the Napoleonic suppressions. So it's quite possible that some of these may show up. And of course, things did come back from St. Titus, the cathedral, the Messa Panditisa in the Salute. Of course, is the Palladium of Candia. It's hopeful there'll be some more, but I think the stellar visitation just gives us an idea of the losses, unfortunately, that we have. But who knows? We might some more research in the Noti da Candia now that they're online might
Yes,
might yield something further.
fingers crossed. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the hour. So thank you very much to our two speakers, and thank you to all you who joined us for this session. Hopefully it has been interesting. It certainly was for me. So we'll stop the recording here, I believe. And